So this was a rough start, and I'm totally with Jillian here. The incessant focus on policing different words. Obesity is a medical word that's used to describe a medical condition. Honestly, to me, if I were still fat, calling me fat-bodied would be a bit worse. But that's just me, and this is why trying to change medical terminology is a bad idea, because the territory she's venturing into is totally subjective. Who gets to decide what is and isn't offensive? Body positivity. I typically don't make it through a full video whenever a Jubilee surrounded episode comes out. They're usually just so cringe and I just can't do it. Somewhere along the line, we stopped arguing about data and we started arguing about definitions. And once that happens and the debate has been derailed, it's incredibly tough to get it back on track. Jillian was having none of this during her debates though, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. There were a ton of points made, however, and of course Jubilee had to throw in some fact checks, and so I wanted to go through some of the points made and some of the studies referenced and see what actually checks out. I don't talk politics on this channel. Honestly, I don't talk politics with many people at all. I judge people on their character, how they treat me, and how I observe them treat and talk about others. But this video is going to get a little political. It's unavoidable, unfortunately, because of the nature of this topic and the people that are fighting for it. If I lose some of you in my audience because of my opinions on this topic, so be it. But because this is in fact my lane, I have to speak up about it, and I'm going to stay true to myself and true to what the evidence actually suggests. So stick around because this is going to be a doozy of a video. But real quick, if you like getting your health and fitness information from someone who can actually read and understand the studies that you hear about so often and can bob and weave between many different worlds, strength, running, hypertrophy, athletics, then hit that like and subscribe button. My name is Randall James. I'm a strength and a running coach with over 11 years of coaching experience and over 14 years of fitness experience. And today we are breaking down this Jillian Michaels surrounded debate. Basically, this channel is just a means of me getting the things that I like to think about out of my head and into a creative outlet. Sometimes I do reaction content as well. And it's also a way of me formulating my opinions. People ask me a lot of questions and I want to be well prepared to answer them. But anyways, with all that out of the way, on to the video.
Hi, I'm Jillian Michaels. I'm a fitness expert and a health advocate. And today I am surrounded by 20 body positivity activists. All right, my first surrounded claim is that obesity is not healthy and pretending it is puts lives at risk.
So if you're not familiar with how these Jubilee episodes go, they bring in a so-called expert to sit in the middle of a group of people from the opposite side. They say the premise, and then the outer group of participants race to the empty chair to debate the expert. In this case, Jillian Michaels is up to bat. She's a personal trainer and fitness entrepreneur who's best known for her role on the show The Biggest Loser, where she showcased high-intensity training methods and had a no-nonsense style. She's surrounded by 20 body positivity activists. Whoever makes it to the chair has a certain amount of time to debate Jillian, but the other activists can vote that person out by raising their red flags. Now that you know the premise, let's check out the first clip.
I'm Edie.
Nice to meet you,
I'm an
Edie.
eating disorder therapist. I'm going to do my best to not use the O word because I find it pretty offensive. So I'm going to use fat-bodied as we talk.
Okay.
Do you understand why people find it harmful and triggering?
Overweight and obese is literally just having too much body fat. It has nothing to do with the quality of the person.
Yeah, I agree with you on that.
Are we going to debate the claim?
Yeah,
Or
I just
are
wanted
we
to.
Gonna,
Yeah, I wanted to clarify though the
are we
language.
going to pretend like I'm a 3 and you're my mommy, telling me how to talk?
Wow. Okay.
Okay.
So the claim that you're saying is that it is inherently unhealthy to live in a fat body.
It's inherently unhealthy to have excess body fat, yes.
Okay. Where are you getting that information from?
Okay. There are dozens of MRT trials that show having excess body fat. Dozens is causal, not correlated.
No, that's not true. There's no disease that just fat-bodied people get.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that. But obesity lends itself to all-cause mortality.
So this was a rough start, and I'm totally with Jillian here. The incessant focus on policing different words. Obesity is a medical word that's used to describe a medical condition. Honestly, to me, if I were still fat, calling me fat-bodied would be a bit worse. But that's just me. And this is why trying to change medical terminology is a bad idea, because the territory she's venturing into is totally subjective. Who gets to decide what is and isn't offensive? This language point is going to be a big one for me as we sift through this. But let's get to the claim that Jillian made. There are dozens of MRT trials that show a causative role of obesity in all-cause mortality. MRT stands for Mendelian randomization trial. It is a way of separating genetically predisposed people to certain illnesses and conditions from people that are less predisposed. In this case, they would separate people that are genetically predisposed to a higher BMI from people that are not. The first check they would need is, do these people that are predisposed to a higher BMI actually have a higher BMI? Then they would need to check the instance of disease. If they're able to check both boxes, that they have a higher BMI and a disease, then that supports a causal relationship. This is based on Mendel's law of inheritance, which says across large populations, genetic variants are distributed randomly. And so when you separate by genetic predisposition, you're inherently getting your own randomization process that reduces many traditional confounders. Typically, things like muscle mass and height can be confounders. So because of Mendelian randomization, it tends to balance confounders across groups. But this isn't a perfect causal link. The genes must affect disease only through BMI, meaning whatever gene they're controlling for cannot also have links to high blood pressure or maybe even ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease like I have, because that would mean that mortality rate is also affected by those diseases. I hope this all makes sense to you, but the point is, Jillian is right that there are a ton of Mendelian randomization studies that show a strong link between being overweight and all-cause mortality, like this one titled A Mendelian Randomization Study of the Effect of Body Mass Index on 52 Causes of Death Among 125,000 Mexican Adults with Mixed Ancestry, that showed that every 5-point increase in BMI, whether you're going from 20 to 25 or 30 to 35, was associated with about an 80% higher risk of death in this model. Now, this is the average across all diseases. If we dive into some specific categories, though, it's worse. Vascular metabolic deaths were at a 115% increased risk per +5 increase in BMI. Renal deaths were an increase of 259% per +5 BMI. Infectious deaths had a 161% increase per +5 BMI. These are massive effect sizes. So while it's important for Jillian to stop using language that's so strong, like the word causal, she's on the money, as there are many studies showing similar results. And as far as I'm concerned, we can still get the message across to these people while not giving them any ammunition to be like, nuh-uh, not causal, it's associative. Like, okay, just be like, granted, it's associated. Now let's continue on with the point that the risks associated with being overweight are absolutely massive. The other thing that sort of pissed me off here is what that blonde Edie said towards the end there. There is no disease that just fat-bodied people get. Like, come on, man. That's not what we're saying. It's just like cigarettes. No one would debate that cigarettes have a causal link to lung cancer, but that doesn't mean that cigarettes are the only thing that cause lung cancer, does it? No. Other people that don't smoke will get lung cancer.
Okay, so the reason why is because registered dietitian, school for 6 years, study nutrition, weights, all the stuff, and
Tell
we
me
can't
what
keep.
lipotoxicity is.
It doesn't come off my curriculum because it's bullshit. Because it's a TikTok thing
What is
that's
it?
like,
What is
cortisol
it?
face or whatever.
It's
But
not.
please, just
Listen
back
to me.
studies.
It is not
Back to the
bullshit.
studies, back to the
It's
studies.
ectopic fat.
But can we just
It's
say,
when
because you keep
fat
sidestepping
ends
and then we
up-
can
I'm
never
not
get anywhere.
sidestepping. This is the claim.
Okay.
The claim is that obesity is unhealthy. Lipotoxicity
But the
is
reason-
not bullshit.
but-
It is the definition of ectopic fat.
It's
When
funny it never
fat
came up in
gets
6 years of a
deposited-
professional accredited undergrad.
What's fatty liver disease?
I know what fatty liver. I was a
What
clinical
is it?
dietitian in a
That's
hospital.
lipotoxicity.
Okay,
Okay.
so-
When fat is in the liver, when fat is in the heart, when fat gets deposited in the brain.
So this was brutal to watch. And actually, this activist makes a point that is at the heart of a lot of people's distrust of the medical system. She says it's funny that in over 6 years of schooling, lipotoxicity never came up. Okay, so what does that say about your schooling? You think just because you went to school that you now have been taught everything there is to teach, that every single thing you were taught in school is current and up to date? If you don't know about lipotoxicity and lipid intermediates, then we have a problem. This is also a problem with type 2 diabetes docs. Do me a favor. The next time you talk to a doctor and they're describing how type 2 diabetes happens, they'll usually say something along the lines of, over time, the cell becomes resistant to insulin, and so that insulin has nowhere to go, forcing glucose to stay inside the bloodstream, which will bind to your A1C and block oxygen from getting where it needs to get. Ask them how the cells become resistant. I'm willing to bet a lot of money that a lot of them won't have a solid answer for you. Energy overload and ectopic fat is one of the most established pathways we know of when it comes to type 2 diabetes. Think of two different steaks. You have a nice lean top round where you can see all of the individual fibers, nice and clean. But then you have a ribeye. Ectopic fat is that ribeye steak. Fat starts to infiltrate places that it shouldn't, and you end up with adipocytes and lipid intermediates, which interfere with insulin signaling. The fact that she thinks this is TikTok BS is honestly quite scary and really makes me wonder about school nowadays.
A person who's fat or lives in a larger body, we can't take away that that person has probably experienced higher stress levels their whole life from experiencing marginalization at every corner, from shows like The Biggest Loser to the doctor's office. We can't take away that they haven't been given evidence-based health options because when they go to a doctor, they're told to go lose weight.
When fat gets deposited in the
But
brain,
you're not answering what I'm saying.
how does, I'm confused. Are you suggesting these are the reasons people become overweight?
No, I'm suggesting that a person could be in a larger body and be perfectly healthy based on
Do
their
you realize
labs,
that
their
only
cholesterol.
7% of people who are classified as overweight or obese, call it whatever you guys feel comfortable with, only 7% are classified as healthy.
Say that was true. Say we
I
knew
can,
for
I can
certain.
go grab the data for you right now if you
Okay.
want.
Say we knew for certain that it was unhealthy, that what you're saying is true.
Okay, so this is now contending with the idea of healthy at any size. Can you actually be healthy at any size? Jillian cites a 7% figure. Only 7% of people were metabolically healthy in the study she cited. But of course, in true Jubilee fashion, they cite 2 other studies that show a 10 to 30% number. Okay. First of all, having a 70 to 90% chance that you will not be metabolically healthy because you're overweight is still a massive risk. So 10 to 30% doesn't matter. Again, I'm going to use the cigarette example. A ton of people that smoke cigarettes never get lung cancer or other conditions like COPD. They're lifetime smokers and live a perfectly healthy and enjoyable life. So do we then say, see, some people are just fine, so it's totally fine to smoke cigarettes? No, that's a really dumb conclusion, right? And honestly, I'd be willing to bet that there is a far greater number of people that smoke cigarettes that never get lung cancer or any of the related diseases than obese people that are metabolically healthy. I'll save that research for another day, though. But let's dig into these 7% and 10 to 30% numbers, because this is very telling. Let's start with the Jubilee 30% number. This comes from this study titled The Obese Without Cardiometabolic Risk Factor Clustering and the Normal Weight with Cardiometabolic Risk Factor Clustering Prevalence and Correlates of 2 Phenotypes Among the U.S. Population. First, we need to know how they even defined metabolically healthy. Basically, if the people they looked at had normal blood pressure, triglycerides, fasting glucose, HDL cholesterol, HOMA-IR, and or C-reactive protein, they were classified as metabolically healthy. Here's the important part, though. They allowed people to have up to 1 metabolic abnormality. So if you had high blood pressure, but everything else was perfect, you were classified as metabolically healthy. Does that make sense to you? This is the study that Jubilee cited. Bias. The study found that 51.3% of overweight adults and 31.7% of obese adults were metabolically healthy based on these criteria. There's a massive problem, though. I'll get to it in a moment. Let's take a look at the 7% study that Jillian cited. This study was way more recent, from 2023, titled Trends in Prevalence of Metabolically Healthy Obesity Among U.S. Adults. Now, I didn't find the 6.8 number that Jubilee threw up on screen. Maybe that was a typo because it is extremely close. It might have been just a rounding error or something. But let's check out how they define metabolically healthy in this study. They had 4 metabolic components, and this one was much more strict. You must have 0 out of 4 of these components to be classified as metabolically healthy. Those were blood pressure, blood glucose, HDL, and triglycerides. So they included less components, but with one critical difference. They also included medications for blood pressure and diabetes. So if someone was on blood pressure medications, they were classified as metabolically unhealthy, which makes 100% sense. If you need meds to fix your numbers, I'm sorry, but you're not healthy. This is like Dr. Mike Israetel going on Diary of a CEO podcast and spouting out that his blood pressure numbers are perfect, but that he's on blood pressure meds. This really makes me chuckle. But this is why it's so important to not just run with what people tell you. I know it's a pain, but you have to check things out for yourself, at least until you found someone who has proven themselves to be reliable so that you don't have to fact check them anymore. Jubilee felt the need to fact check Jillian's study, saying there are conflicting data that show 10 to 30% of obese people are metabolically healthy. But that number is based on a bad study with bad study design. They allowed for up to 1 metabolic abnormality, and while they measured medications, they did not exclude medication use from their final figure, which is a massive confounder and a massive red flag. Millions of people are on blood pressure and diabetes meds. Tens of millions of people. But anyways, this study found that the number of metabolically healthy obese people has gone up from 3.2% to 6.6%. So Jillian was being charitable with 7%. And based on the study design point I went over, I'm choosing to go with this lesser figure.
When
Still
you
a separate
see
issue, though. I'm trying to say, that the ways body positivity suggests people deal with body issues and trauma is an oversimplification. And it has to do with things like intuitive eating principles that get misrepresented by influencers.
Okay.
Okay.
I can definitely agree with that.
Well, then, unfortunately, you and I are so far on the same page.
Well,
So I'm really happy that Jillian brought up intuitive eating because this is something that I personally feel strongly about. I used to be overweight, for those of you that don't know. At my lightest, I had lost close to 100 pounds. I've since put some of that weight back on in the form of muscle, but when I was overweight, my intuition was totally screwed up. And biologically, this makes sense. Having excess fat on your body ruins your hormonal profile, and not just your sex hormones, but your hunger hormones as well. The two big ones are leptin and ghrelin. Leptin suppresses appetite, and ghrelin increases appetite. But let's go through some of the basics of intuitive eating so I can show you just how bad of a concept this is. We're going to boil this down to 3 core ideas. 1, you should trust your hunger. Eat when you're hungry and don't delay it or ignore it. The thought there is that it's the delaying part that causes people to overindulge. And there's some truth to this. I usually use this example. If you have 2 people, person A allows themselves to eat a couple cookies a week, and person B heavily restricts themselves on a weekly basis, person B will end up eating more cookies in one session than person A intentionally did throughout the entire week. Restriction leads to binging. This is true. Idea 2, trust your fullness. Stop when you feel satisfied, not stuffed. And then idea 3, remove food rules. There are no good or bad foods. No restriction-driven mindset. Again, some of this I'm on board with. The big issue I have with this is hunger cues. Hunger cues don't work for obese people. Let's go through how adiposity affects hunger. Leptin is released after eating your food. More leptin should signal you have enough energy. You then should experience a drop in appetite and an increase in energy expenditure. What actually happens in an obese person, though, is leptin resistance. The hypothalamus becomes less responsive, and that signal does not get through effectively, which means appetite stays elevated and energy expenditure doesn't rise much. Now with ghrelin, this one's a little interesting because this hormone that tells us to be hungry is actually lower in overweight individuals. But the catch isn't that this will end up making us less hungry. The catch is that after we eat, ghrelin is supposed to drop. We've achieved the task, we've got the food, we've satisfied the condition that increased it in the first place. But in an obese person, suppression is blunted, meaning ghrelin drops less and rebounds a lot faster, which means you feel satisfied after a meal, but really not for that long, and your hunger signals will reappear shortly after that. This means more frequent urges to eat. There's also a higher likelihood that you'll continue eating. The blunted response of ghrelin means it's harder to recognize I'm done. Now combine the two. Leptin, the you have enough energy signal, is weakened, and ghrelin, the you're hungry signal, is not fully suppressed as it should be, and you end up with a disaster where someone could literally eat unopposed all day, every day. Again, I've been there. I would eat for no reason, and it would be huge amounts of food, entire pizzas, entire boxes of Oreos, 2 burgers and fries at the same time. Combine this with the core idea of there are no bad foods, and you end up with highly palatable, ultra-processed foods that are hypercaloric, combining fats and carbohydrates entering the picture. These foods hijack the dopamine centers of our brain and bypass hunger signaling by combining the perfect amount of crunch, salt, sweet, and gooiness. They also don't fill you up. Have you ever eaten a Little Debbie cake and been like, okay, I think I'm full now? No, your eyes start darting around nervously because you think, shit, I might be able to eat 5 of these. I think labeling foods as the words good or bad is definitely something to get away from because that does assign a moral judgment to it. But instead, you could have a color-coded grading system. Green, yellow, orange. The mix goes as follows. Mostly green, some yellow, occasional orange. Green would be your fruits, vegetables, whole food, lean sources of protein, eggs, basically the new food pyramid. Yellow would be high-fat cuts of meats like ribeyes. From a calorie perspective, not from a saturated fat is bad perspective because I don't believe that. And more processed foods that are macro-friendly like frozen meals. And orange would be cookies, cakes, pies, hot dogs, pizza, and other indulgences. Yellow and orange shouldn't be eliminated, but they should be limited. The point here, though, is that when I was obese, I had no intuition. If someone would have told me that there are no bad foods and that I need to listen to my hunger cues, I probably would have ended up much heavier than I was at my heaviest.
If I go to a doctor, it should be empowering for me to talk about my body.
Of course.
However, when I usually speak to a health expert, it's really not. I'm really more just afraid that they're going to speak to me in a way that degrades my body and makes me feel that shame that you've mentioned. Shame is not a motivator. It really turns people away, whereas the body positivity movement teaches people to have the kind of confidence they need to make choices for themselves.
How's it teaching that?
When you look at yourself in the mirror and you tell yourself, I'm ugly, I'm fat, I'm gross, I don't deserve to be, alive. Like some people get to that extent, right?
I understand.
When you do that to yourself, that is not going to motivate you to then go make the choices that I think we all know are healthy for us.
Totally agree.
Which doesn't.
Then what's the next step, though, dude?
I think that's what we're here
Just looking
to
in the
speak
mirror
about.
and
I
saying,
think that's
actually, I'm healed.
So this one's really complex. I've made several videos about body positivity across the course of this YouTube channel. And so I have done a lot of research on the topic. And to be honest with you, the activist point about being able to go to the doctor that doesn't shame them, there's some truth to this. I want to talk about a study titled Comparisons of Explicit Weight Bias Across Common Clinical Specialties of U.S. Resident Physicians. This study used data from the Changes Study, which was a national longitudinal study that followed 3,200 U.S. medical students. These med students were surveyed on their explicit attitudes toward higher weight individuals. They were asked about anti-fat blame, anti-fat dislike, and their general attitudes towards obese patients. I've covered this study before, so I'll make this brief, but here are some numbers from the study. 30% of resident physicians said they feel more irritated when treating an obese patient compared to a non-obese patient. 28% said they dislike treating obese patients, and 22% said they really don't like fat people much. So these doctors are out there because they're human. But what sorts of outcomes does this lead to? Shorter appointment times, less comprehensive exams, and prescribing fewer medications, basically just worse treatment. Patients have also described less rapport building, less eye contact, dismissive attitudes. But I want to be clear here. A lot of this is based on subjective feedback, and this can get us into hot water. I want to tell you about a pretty famous experiment. You've probably heard about this one on other podcasts, but I want to use this to make a super important point. The Dartmouth scar experiment from 1980. In this study, 24 females were made up with a facial scar and shown the scar in the mirror. They then went out and held a 5 to 6 minute conversation with another person that was labeled a Confederate. These Confederates were blind to conditions. They were also trained to behave consistently, and they used standardized opening lines. They controlled these people's behavior as much as possible. But before the females went in to have the conversation, they touched up the scars, telling the females they were just applying moisturizer, but they actually removed the scar altogether. These women go into the conversation thinking they have a visible scar on their face, but they don't. Same conversation, same other person, same behavior. The only thing that changed was what they believed about themselves. On a 14-point scale, the control group rated the other person's tenseness at about 2.4. The scar group, 8. That's not a small bump. That's a completely different experience of the same interaction. They also believed the other person found them less attractive. The control group is around 8.6, while the scar group dropped to 6.4. So now you've got someone walking into a normal conversation, but internally they're thinking, this person is uncomfortable around me. They're judging me. They don't like how I look. And the other person, they had no idea there was ever a scar. So where is that perception coming from? It's not coming from objective behavior changes. It's coming from interpretation. And you actually see this show up in what they focused on. But those same behaviors were happening in the control group too. They just didn't interpret them the same way. That's the point I want you to take from this. When someone believes something is wrong with them, their brain starts scanning the environment for confirmation. And it really doesn't need strong evidence. It'll grab onto subtle things like eye contact, tone, or body language and build an entire story around it. So, do some doctors have some negative feelings around fat people? Yes, there's survey data directly from these docs' mouths. But when we start to make claim about less eye contact, less patience, and being dismissive, we have to be really careful, because if a patient is already expecting those things, it can shape how they experience the entire interaction.
But I would never, ever disagree with you here. I would cooperate with you in any way you ask me to.
So would you say that it should be against the law to discriminate against people based on their body size?
Unquestionably.
So why don't we see more fitness and wellness advocates asking for that?
I'm happy to ask for it. I'll ask for it right now. I didn't know that you thought I wasn't for it. Of course I feel that way.
Well,
I really wish they would have gone into greater detail here, because this could definitely turn into a slippery slope. If the idea is that you can't discriminate against body size by not allowing employment, or if you're a business owner and you're refusing to serve fat people, yes, I'm all for that. But we have to be careful not to lump free speech into this equation. I'm not sure if you're aware of what's going on in the UK currently, but there are thousands of people arrested every year for violating their hate speech laws online. This Forbes article cites 12,000 arrests a year. That is nutty. I will never advocate for people going to jail because of the things they say. I'm a free speech advocate, not necessarily absolutist, but when we start to send people to jail for the things they say, the question becomes, well, who's fat and who gets to decide what is hate speech in this realm? Someone could say something completely harmless to a totally unstable person, and that person could deem it hate speech and have the other thrown in jail. Unacceptable. Think about it. In this very Jubilee debate, several people have come out against the word obesity, saying it's offensive. So imagine this. You tweeted something 6 years ago using the word obese. It's now 2028 and laws have changed. Not only has the US enacted hate speech laws to allow arrests of people using offensive language, but obesity is now declared a hateful and offensive word in exchange for fat-bodied. Someone digs up your tweet history. Next thing you know, the police are at your door ready to arrest you. This truly would lead to a dystopian future. This is why definitions are so important, and it really drives me up a wall when people try to mess with them. The muddier they can make the waters, the easier it is for people to get in trouble. This is my problem with postmodernism. They reject the idea that there is one objective truth or universal truths, and instead argue that everything is subjective. This leads to language being misused and misunderstood. This leads to completely harmless words being interpreted as hateful. It's a very scary and dark road to go down. So yes, make it against the law to discriminate in the form of refusing business because someone is fat or something like that. But do not make it illegal to discriminate in the form of language. There will always be dickheads, racists, sexists, and the like. But we can't silence these people. We have to combat their ideas with better ideas. This is why freedom of speech is so important. But my final thoughts are this. Jillian did a fantastic job in this debate. They definitely picked the right person to come on and represent fitness professionals. She was mostly fair to all of the activists while at the same time being assertive and pulling them back to the underlying premise instead of allowing the conversation to get derailed. I think the body positivity movement is a noble attempt to try and make fat people feel better about being fat. But when it gets hijacked by movements like healthy at any size and intuitive eating, it's losing the plot. As Jillian said many times throughout the debate, okay, you love yourself. Now what's next? You're healed? No, you still have to make better food decisions and figure out productive ways of exercising. Just loving yourself isn't the answer. And in fact, shame is actually quite potent for some people, myself included, and in many different realms, not just in fitness. If I'm stacked with work and instead of putting my head down and working, I decide to sit down and play PlayStation for 6 hours that evening, the next morning, there's going to be shame there. Do you think that's good shame or bad shame? I personally think it's good shame. It's the shame that I had stuff to do and I could have played PlayStation for 1 to 2 hours instead and still gotten a lot of things done that I needed to do. Shame is a negative feedback loop. You perform an action, shame creeps in, you suppress that action in the future. Where I think it's troublesome is when other people are shaming you. Our default should not be to make fun of people that are fat or going through something. That being said, I personally know some people that do like to be shamed. If they're messing up, they want to be told. But obviously, there are productive ways of doing that and unproductive ways of doing that. But ultimately, I think the body positivity movement shifts the locus of control to everyone else but the fat person. It says society is beating you down and it's their fault that you're overweight or going through an eating disorder. It's because of TikTok, or it's because of beauty standards, or it's because of calorie counting, and on and on and on it goes. But eventually it just leads right back to, okay, now what? I think instead we should just accept where we are, not take things personally, and figure out what is the next action that is going to move me towards my goal that I can take right now. There's a saying, it's none of my business what other people think about me. This is how I operate. I'm 100% blind to people that judge me for the things I say and post. I just move forward and help the people that want to be helped. There's always going to be people that criticize and judge. You can't control them. Oh, I know. I'll just say they're offending me and then push for legislation to make those words illegal. But anyways, that's it for me. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think body positivity is helping or hurting? Or both? I love a good debate, so hit me with your best take. Once again, my name is Randall James, and if you're still here watching, I really appreciate you. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button on your way out. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you at the next one. Stay adaptive.